Welcome to the show, everybody. Got an exciting one here for you. We are talking about the worst fantasy football running backs for 2022 so far. Now, I know a lot of people still have fantasy to go. A lot of people already eliminated from their leagues. A lot of leagues in fantasy football playoffs. So we have different scenarios predicated on how your league forms. But I want to talk about the guys that have underperformed. For example, going into the season, Jonathan Taylor was a top prospect going in. Where is he sitting right now? What happened? How bad is he doing? I want to address the guys that had high ADPs at the running back position, but have not performed anywhere near where the mainstream consensus had them. Okay, so this is a very important episode. I take full ownership on a couple of these guys, including Najee Harris. Not as many as the Consheeps have here that have completely failed this year as fantasy performers, but I want to take ownership on the ones that I was wrong on as well. So we're talking fantasy football busts for 2022, specifically at the running back position. Again, we're well deep into the season where we can start analyzing the stuff, talking about it, venting about it, and really having a discussion so that we can kind of foresee trends and patterns that we want to avoid going into next season. And the first trend and pattern, comes down to, copying and pasting. That's what the mainstream talk about. And I want to make sure that you guys get out of that mindset of this copy and paste BS, because that's not going to help you win your league. So I've got a list around 7 to 10 running backs that have underperformed, guys, that are the worst running backs for fantasy football 2022 that had higher ADP. So yes, we know certain players are bad. We know that, Jerick McKinnon is bad, and Damian Harris and Rex Burkhead and, Nyheim Hines and, Joshua Kelly, Gus Edwards. We know these guys are terrible. We're not talking about those. We're talking about the big boys, the guys that were drafted higher ADP that have just not performed. All right. I'm going to get into that. Before I do, guys, I know a lot of people are done their fantasy leagues. A lot of people still have, again, into playoff contention now. But if you're done, either way, if you're not done, try prizepicks.com, guys. A fun way to play DFS to enhance that game watching experience as we head towards the playoffs, guys. You simply select more or less on player props. For example, receiving yards, rushing yards, select 2 to 5 players. You pick more or less, and it's that easy to win. Try it out, prizepicks.com. The code you want to use is DFS Lion. They'll double your first deposit up to $100. Go give it a try, guys. It's a ton of fun. prizepicks.com. DFS Lion is the code you want to use to get the perk of doubling your first deposit up to $100. Try it, guys. It's super fun to play during games. All right, guys? And again, DFS Lion, prizepicks.com. All right, let's talk about this, guys. The first running back that kind of jumps out to me, and I kind of want to make this more of an open discussion instead of a list, and I'm going to go back and forth. So it's not going to be like RB1, RB2. Like, I like lists. I know it keeps people engaged and stuff, but I want to have more of an open discussion here about it. More of, like a talk show. Have fun. And again, in the comments, I want to make this super interactive. Drop a comment below. Let me know which running back really screwed your fantasy team and you this season. And it was a big disappointment predicated on where they were drafted, which was high up, right? So the first one that jumps to mind here, and again, we can talk about all the stuff that went well. Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry for us that follow this channel. Josh Jacobs, I said, was a safe guy. He overperformed. Austin Eckler stayed consistent. Tony Pollard stepped up into the top 10 the way that's sitting. Certain players, we could talk about that. But let's talk about the guys that really crapped the bed that were high up. And the guy that really jumps out to me and is one of the worst, okay, is DeAndre Swift. Now, this is a guy that everybody, except for me, had him in the top 10. All right, everybody and their mother had DeAndre Swift in the top 10. Actually, he was looking at the rankings. He was actually top 8 on the Consheeps rankings. Currently, right now, sitting 25th amongst running backs. This is 13 weeks in, by the way, guys. 124 points, 125 if we round up. What do you have? 4 rushing touchdowns. Now, he started to kind of pick it up here. I know he was injured a little bit. I get it. But I factor in injury. Injury counts. When I tell you guys don't draft Cooper Kupp, he's coming off a pinnacle year. A possible injury is going to happen. What goes up must come down. Decline, Super Bowl regression. That means don't draft Cooper Kupp. Everybody drafted Cooper Kupp. And now, well, not everybody. People that listen to this channel didn't. But the mainstream consensus all had Cooper Kupp as the number 1 wide receiver. I said, no, injury counts. That's going to happen. Something's going to happen. That's going to make him fall out of that contention. And sure enough, it happened. DeAndre Swift is a guy, years to wow us, we're not wow. 2 years into the league, hasn't finished a season the first 2 years, going into year 3. How do you put this guy as a top 8 running back? You just don't. He hasn't proven it. His peak attempts were 151 in 2021. I faded him. I said, avoid him. But yet the mainstream consensus all had him in the magazines, on the websites. The analysts had him as a top 10 running back across all the boards. And he's just not performed there. In fact, Jamal Williams has been the animal and the beast on that roster, now currently sitting 12th in PPR amongst running backs and having the top, number one in touchdowns, 14 rushing touchdowns, Jamal Williams. And if you watch the Hard Knocks series, I watched parts of it. It was focused on the Lions. You saw that Williams had that Lion mentality. He wasn't just going to sit on the bench and sit there and let Swift be a full workhorse running back. So this is something we foresaw, and if you got 16 rounds, you saw it. But DeAndre Swift, again, currently sitting 25th in PPR on the rankings amongst running backs. Completely unacceptable for being a top 8 running back. So he's a big-time bust and one of the worst running backs based on where he was drafted, okay? Other running backs that pop out here for me, this one's an obvious one. I take full ownership. Let me get this out of the way, is Najee Harris. Now, that being said, Najee Harris was actually a top 5-4 running back going into the season across the board with everybody. So some people tend to pin it on me. Listen, I liked, and I said this in all my podcasts going into the season, I liked Najee better last year because Big Ben was there, more checkdowns. I was going to see the receptions. I looked at what he did with Le'Veon Bell, and I saw that Najee was better talent than Le'Veon Bell, and I thought that there'd be a good opportunity for him last year, and he did. He performed really well. Going into this year, I didn't trust the quarterback situation going with Mitch Trubisky. I understand that Kenny Pickett was going to take over. I kind of foresaw that happening, but I still didn't trust the situation. And obviously, Najee Harris not performing on, based on his ADP, and he's been a bust this year. There's absolutely no denying that Najee Harris has been a bust. So when I look at him, from a game-to-game basis, I look at inconsistency, right? And where was Najee Harris drafted? He was drafted in around top 5. He's sitting 20th, guys, right now in fantasy points. He was a top 5 pick across the board. So again, going back to the game-by-game breakdown, I'm going to pull it up in PPR. I'm taking a quick look here. He's only had one good game in week 11. Other than that, he's had 13 pointers. He had a 7.4 in week 4, a 6.6 pointer, 11 pointer week 7, just low 9.9 points week 10. I mean, he's only had one good game, 27.6. Other than that, 13 pointers, 10 pointers. He's been an absolute disaster, just not getting it done. I think he's only had, 4 rushing touchdowns on the season. Considering he's supposed to be the workhorse running back, you would think that he'd get all the goal line work. But again, the Steelers having trouble getting near the goal line, as an offense, right? So again, is it all Najee's fault? Not really. But when we look at it from a fantasy perspective, we don't care because we drafted this guy early and we're expecting results out of him and we're just not getting it. So Najee Harris has been a big time bust this season. And again, based on where his ADP was, sitting 20th, big time bust. So we talked about Swift. We talked about Najee. Another guy that really jumps out at me, I got to talk about him, is Travis Etienne. This is a guy that everybody told you, draft Travis Etienne as your RB1 as part of a zero RB strategy. So they said, don't go robust RB. There's tons of value at running back later, rounds 4, 5, and beyond, that you can get Travis Etienne as your RB1 and you'll be content. Sure enough, he's been an absolute bust. Now, mind you, he's had a couple good games, right? Week 10, he had a 10.3, though. A week 12, 0.3. And a week 13, 7.6. So the past 3 outings, he's been terrible. Prior to that, you started to see him kind of get into a groove, get into a role, and become a focal point in the Jacksonville Jaguars offense, compiling a couple good games, including the 2 big games in week 8 and 9, 26.6 points in week 9 and 25.2 points in week 8. 18.9 in week 7. So he had a nice stretch of safety and security from week 5 to 9. But again, not massive numbers. And he had a slow start to the season, was a complete bust then, and then has been a complete bust the past 3 weeks. So he's had 6 weeks at the beginning of the season and the past 3 weeks up until week 13, 6 weak games, like terrible games, which have made him, bust worthy, sitting 19th in PPR in fantasy points. Again, this is a guy that people said this is a true RB1. And go ahead and draft him as your RB1 after you load up on wide receivers early on. And he's proven to be a bust, as I predicted. Now, he could have a strong finish near the end of the season, and that's fine. He can have that. But to me, he still is a bust, still will be a bust, and still always is a bust. Because, again, we haven't seen anything out of Travis Etienne since his rookie year because he got hurt the first year. So he's technically a rookie this year. and he's just not performed to where we thought he'd perform. Just hasn't been able to stay completely healthy, been busting, had fumble issues. Travis Etienne, I'd say, is a big time. When I say big time bust, predicated on where he was drafted, in and around the average of the 4th round, sometimes 5th round. Again, every league is different, right? All right, so we talked about Najee, we talked about Swift, we talked about Travis Etienne. Again, drop in the comments below if there's anyone else jumping out at you, screaming, saying, oh man, this guy is a big bust. If you're listening on audio, head on over, guys, to my YouTube channel. Just got verified there on YouTube. Excited about that. Head on over to your YouTube channel, dive into this video, and drop some comments here, right? Other guys here that have just not performed to where they should have, and again, this is very disappointing to a lot of people, but a guy that jumps out to me big time is Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara currently sitting 15th amongst the rankings right now in PPR, and he's just been trash. Okay, he had one good week in week 8, 42.8 pointer, bad weeks 9, 10, 12, 13, 5.7 points in week 13. Been a big disappointment, averaging 3.8 yards per carry. And the main issue I had 2 issues with Kamara going into the season. I kind of laid this out in the 16-round draft session. The big problem with Kamara is that he's kind of hit his peak, right? We've seen the best of what Alvin Kamara can offer. What is he in his 6th season, something like that? We've seen the best out of Kamara. It's nothing but downhill from here on end for Alvin Kamara. So that was a big thing for me that was kind of turning me off. Then he had that looming suspension going into the season. Like, I don't trust he's going to play the full season. So far, he's played 11 games, 3.8 yards per carry, 1 rushing touchdown, couple receiving touchdowns, I believe 2. And he's just been a bust. He's been completely inconsistent. That offense has been inconsistent. They've got quarterback issues. They can't figure it out. So when I look at the Saints as a whole, the offense was different. It's not the same Kamara you got years ago with Drew Brees. You don't have that consistency. You don't have that stability at the quarterback position. And you see the running back suffer from that. We see, again, we're doing this episode so we can learn patterns. We saw it with Najee Harris. We're seeing it with Kamara. And now we can start looking at trends that quarterbacks play a big role in the success of the running backs. How good is the quarterback? How consistent is he? How solid is he? How many checkdowns does he throw down to his running backs? If there's going to be a quarterback change in the season like there was with Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett, how is that going to affect the running backs? And it does affect them, and for the most part, in a negative way, because you're not getting that stability at the quarterback position, as you're seeing, for example, with Justin Herbert and Eckler. You get that consistency, you get that rapport. What you see is what you get. That's why you're getting consistent performance out of Austin Eckler. You tack in some injuries for Eckler. For example, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams have been banged up. He's going to get more checkdowns, more volume, more receptions. He's got that rapport. Again, Kamara has been affected by quarterback. Najee Harris has been affected by quarterback, and it's translating. We're seeing it. Speaking of affected by quarterback, which goes into my next guy here, who's been a big-time bust. Again, Kamara sitting 15th, we talked about. Najee sitting 20th, 13 weeks in, getting into week 14. Next guy is Jonathan Taylor. Now, we talked about Jonathan Taylor prior to the season, similarly the way we talked about Cooper Kupp, that once you come off a pinnacle season, it's very unlikely you repeat your numbers again. And Jonathan Taylor's been a big-time bust. Injuries are a factor. He's played 10 games, going into week 14. He's missed some time. He's sitting at 4 touchdowns. This is a running back that everybody told you, except for me, that is the number 1 running back off the board. What happened? He busted. Why did he bust? Because what goes up must come down. And historically, it's very unlikely that a running back finishes on top 2 years in a row. So you factor in a regression, whether it be injury, whether it be natural regression, whether it be different situations, right? And going back to the other discussion we just had, the quarterback situation was different. Matt Ryan coming in, a lot of uncertainty in this offense, changes, things happen. They didn't have a true wide receiver one. I wasn't sold on Pittman being the one. He's actually busted big time, and I wasn't really excited about him going into the season. Thought I can get some value with Alec Pierce. He even busted. It's been a disaster, right, with the Colts in general. But when you look at a guy like Jonathan Taylor, sitting 21st in fantasy points, 144, 4 touchdowns, 861 yards on 192 attempts, big time regression from last year. Now, theoretically, the mainstream should, still believe in, Jonathan Taylor, right? That's their guy, but they're not. They're going to copy and paste whoever the top finisher is. So if Eckler and Jacobs finish on top, they're going to put Jacobs and Eckler on top. But you look at it this year, you're like, okay, well, Jacobs is in a contract year, Barkley's in a contract year. They may not perform the same way next year, yet they're going to be copied and pasted same as last year. It's ridiculous, guys. So now you're starting to see patterns and trends, but Jonathan Taylor, a big-time bust. Let's go through some audible mentions here. James Conner, Cam Akers, to name a few. Zeke Elliott, we saw his regression happening over the past 3 years as he's been declining. Pollard's been inclining. So Pollard's sitting 9th right now in PPR fantasy points amongst running backs. Zeke Elliott's sitting 24th. He's missed some time getting a bulk of the goal line work, 8 touchdowns. But I mean, Pollard has been a huge thorn, getting, dipping into those attempts, 148 attempts to Zeke's 157. So the attempts are pretty much 50-50. Pollard also getting 8 rushing touchdowns, getting involved in the receiving game, getting 2 receiving touchdowns. Pollard's been a thorn, which declines Zeke Elliott's value. Again, he was a 3rd, 4th round ADP, not returning his investment, okay? And like I said before, James Conner, I told you to avoid him too. He was very touchdown heavy last year. That's why he was ranked high. Currently sitting 28th. Decline naturally happened with him. And Cam Akers, again, 2nd to 3rd round pick. I said years to wow us, we're not wowed. He's been a big-time bust as well. So these are just some names that are jumping out at me. Leonard Fournette sitting 14th. He's kind of been busting on his ADP. Antonio Gibson sitting 16th. He's busted based on his ADP. David Montgomery sitting 23rd. He's busted on his ADP because Justin Fields has stepped up as a running back there with the Bears offense. So in regards to running backs, what have we learned from this? We've learned that you do not copy and paste rankings. You look and project forward. You see that Derrick Henry was down last year. He's going to bounce back. He's sitting 4th. You see that Saquon Barkley was due for a contract year. He's sitting 5th amongst running backs. You take a look at Jacobs, right? I thought Jacobs would have had a safe year. I wasn't even on the, Jacobs wasn't even on my radar, but he's been crushing it, man. Number 2 amongst, running backs at fantasy points, 1,303 yards. Been absolutely having himself a great season. So Josh Jacobs is an example of contract year. Saquon Barkley, contract year, right? These guys are hungry. They're young. They're dynamic. They want to make something happen in their career. They want to get paid. So they're going to have that extra incentive and chip on their shoulder to perform. Whereas you have the declining Alvin Kamara's where you got to see, man, I got to be cautious there, right? Like there's a decline. Now, a guy like Najee Harris, right? Crappy year. Next year, let's take a look. Are they going to have stability at quarterback? Right now, he's going to start looking to get that big contract soon, right? So you start taking a look at these guys that are going to be in for contract years, and are they going to bust next year? Maybe not. Maybe they're still young, like guys like Najee Harris. Maybe even DeAndre Swift takes a step up next year. So you got to take a look at scenarios, right? Breece Hall, right? Got injured on IR, was doing great prior to that. Great talent, right? Went on IR, he's sitting 30th right now. Where is he going to be ranked next year? We got to take a look at that, right? He could finish on top next year. So this is the type of stuff that I look at in 16 rounds, and that's why your light years ahead of the competition, because we're projecting forward. We're not simply copying and pasting predicated on last year's rankings, right? What goes up must come down. Sometimes things change. Quarterback change, scenarios, contract years, and everything's got to be factored in when you are looking at these running backs, okay? So, again, the big ones for me that jump out that are big-time busts are, of course, the Travis Etienne, the Alvin Kamara, Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor's a big one. DeAndre Swift is one of the biggest ones. James Conner. And most of these I called, except for the Najee Harris thing, which, again, I did say that I wasn't excited about him and there was going to be a bit of a regression. So, props to me. I'm seeing, it's never going to be 100%. I don't expect to be 100%, but I just want to be more right than wrong. And that's what I'm very grateful that I'm being able to do for you guys. All right. If you're new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe, hit the thumbs up, drop a comment below. Who's been a big time bust for you at the running back position? Love to get your feedback. Drop it below. All right, guys. Appreciate you. I'm out.